was a rumble in the jungle. Once I heard Dad was outside again counting birds, and Mama plugged in a nightlight, and I saw the queen of the world.
Welcome to the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. I am your co-host, Liz.
And I'm your co-host, Natalie. And tonight we have Amy from Montana on, sharing her birth of her 3 children. Amy, thanks so much for coming on tonight. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you both for having me on here. I'm really excited.
Awesome. So if you just want to go ahead and share a little bit about you and your family, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm married to a wonderful man, as we were talking about Montana. He works outside in the freezing cold, building houses. We have 3 little boys, and they are 9, 6, and 2. So there's a little COVID baby in there, and they just keep me busy. They're amazing, and there's just something special about raising little boys. They're busy, and running my own practice. You know, I feel like I'm torn in or pulled in a bunch of directions, and I don't know that I could be any more blessed than to have little boys. So, yeah.
They are the sweetest. I love having a boy first.
Gosh, with our last baby, I was like, okay, maybe this will be a girl. And of course, he's a little boy, and I'm like so grateful. I'm like, if we have another one, I hope I have another little boy. I love them. They love me so much.
You said that you have a practice?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed massage therapist. I actually specialize in prenatal massage, infant massage, and cranial-sacral therapy. So as of recently, I started working more with babies with my cranial-sacral therapy practice, which has been really fun. And I just, mostly work with them in like the first weeks to months after birth, and helping them with breastfeeding issues. So helping them release restrictions throughout the body. And that's been like just the last few months I've gotten the training on that, and it's been so much to like work with babies. So I do that. And then I also am a natural childbirth educator.
That is so cool. I wish you were in my backyard. I love massages.
I had a twin of me in my backyard, so I could have them all the time too.
Yeah, true. Getting them and not giving.
It is a perk of like being a massage therapist, because like there's you find your people and you trade with them.
So if you want to share a little bit about you and your husband deciding to start a family and kind of that process.
So, gosh, my husband and I have like a long history of like knowing each other. We went to a school dance together in high school. We're both from our little town, and I was like, I'm going to run away and never come back. And I came back after college. I was actually a nurse prior to my massage therapy career, and came back and worked here and kind of met with him again. And we were planning a family. I got pregnant, and it was just like, we were just like still young and having fun in life. And then it was like, bam, I'm pregnant. And it was truly like the biggest blessing ever. I mean, for both of us. And so I think that really probably, not planning my pregnancy, this first pregnancy, I look back on it and I'm like, man, even being a nurse, I was so uneducated on what to expect and how to like keep for myself in my pregnancy and in my birth. Gosh, I think I was 23. So I can't say that I was young, but we weren't married, so I don't kind of considered us young. But I, with that pregnancy, I really tried to dive in as much as I could. And so this was 10 years ago. And I'm like, wow, things have like changed so much from now to 10 years ago, like the information that's available. I mean, even like access to books and like, even just being able to have access to like Facebook and Instagram or whatever to be like, hey, what's your guys' favorite book? I think I had What to Expect When You're Expecting. And I was like, okay, this is what I have. I knew I wanted like a natural birth. I wanted like an unmedicated birth, but I didn't really I just went with like my OB that I had always like had for like my, pap smears and annual checks and stuff. And in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, gosh, I wish I would have known to do research. He was like, you don't need a childbirth education class. You're a nurse. You know everything. And I'm kind of just sitting there like, on the sterile table, just like, just very like, it was so unexpected. And I just feel like I just thrown into this world of like becoming a mom. Or I was planning on being a mom. And so I went through my pregnancy. That doctor, he wanted to induce me, even knowing that I wanted a natural birth. And scheduled me for an induction at 39 weeks. And I was like, I don't want to be induced. I really just want to go natural. And he's like, schedule again. If you want to show up, how about you just show up? And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to show up. And he's like, well, if you want to, just decide when that day comes. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not showing up. 40 weeks hit. And, at that point, you're so vulnerable. And I was like, maybe not. And he's like, no. He scheduled me for another one. I didn't show up. I was just like, I'm not going. I don't want to do this. And it was like throughout the whole pregnancy, it was like red flag, red flag, red flag. I just didn't feel like I needed to. But I was like 5 days after my due date, and I finally hope. I thought needle massage. Maybe this is what me into wanting to be a massage therapist. I was like, oh, that was heavenly. I feel good. I surrender to trying to do all of the things to get this baby out. And I'm just going to let go and relax. And I went to sleep that night. I woke up probably about 4 a.m. and was having contractions. And I was like, I'm so excited. And, at this point, you're like, what did I tell you? When you have contractions every like 3 to 5 minutes and they're regular. Yeah. Still. And I was like, I don't know, but this doesn't feel really intense, but I don't really know what it's supposed to feel like. I mean, I was one of the first out of my friends to, have babies. I had another friend who had a baby before, my sister was induced. I just never been around like birth all that much, even though I was a nurse. Yeah. But so I wake up and I'm like, just so excited. And so I'm kind of pacing around. My husband, who was like my boyfriend at the time, he's sleeping. And I'm like, do I wake him? Do I not? And I just waited until 7 when I woke up. And I was like, I'm a labor. Let's hurry up and go to the hospital. Because I was just like, I was scared I wasn't going to have enough time, which, I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, you have so much time. But
they make it seem like you need to like go right away and
or like movies.
Exactly. It's just like everything that we've been like programmed to think about it is like, oh God, but if I don't go right now, what if it happens in the car? And like you get there and you're like, or you experience birth and you're like, that is not how this first one would go for me. And I get in there and I think I have 4 centimeters dilated and I'm feeling all excited. I of course go in at shift change for the nurses. So they're all like stressed out and shift change. And I think the doctor had a few other inductions that I kind of got in the way of. And he just walks in and he like reels in this little red cart, like as he's coming in. And I was kind of like, I remember questioning what that was. And I was texting my mom on my phone to let her know that we were up at the hospital. And he said to me, how are you feeling? And I was like, they're a little intense. I'm doing okay. And he's like, I want you in so much pain that you can't even look at your phone. And I was like, I remember being so taken aback, like, what? And then he's like, well, let's check you and see where you're at. And I was like, okay. And he's checking me and he looks at the nurse and asks for the amni hook, which is, I'm sure you guys know, the little hook to release your membrane. And he's like, I'm going to break your water, okay? Which is like kind of a way of asking, but it's certainly not like an informed consent.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay. And honestly, it wasn't even a thought that I had thought about. And he broke my water and he told me I could get up and start walking around. And man, that hit me so hard. I actually was like walking the hallway and I ran into another, like a friend of mine who was having her baby too. And she's trying to talk to me. And I'm like, I need you to stop talking to me. I think I'm going to puke. And then I just, I went into the bathroom and I, like my whole system just flushed. I'm sitting on the toilet, like flush system. I'm puking. I'm crying. My mom's finally there. She's trying to help me rub my back. And in between contractions, I'm just like, I'm spiraling out of control, which now I look at this and I'm like, I was totally in transition. Knowing my other births, I go very quickly. But at the time, I was scared. And you go back to those movies you were just saying, like, it's scary. And when you don't have, that education, I was like, I was scared and I was really starting to go in that like fight or flight. And so I asked for the epidural and I had a wonderful nurse too. Her name's Dorothy. And I just like am so grateful for her. So she's, like holding me, rubbing my back, encouraging me to breathe through all of this. Cause my husband is like, wide-eyed. He's like, I don't know what to do for you. I want to help you. I don't know how to help you. And like men just want to like help and in a situation they've never been in, like he was just like, oh my gosh. And then my poor mom, I feel like poor mom, she takes the brunt of everything. So I just like didn't want her there, but I needed her there. And and so this nurse was somebody to just help bring me back down. And so she calls to get the epidural and the guy comes in and he just was not very compassionate, and that's all right. But he keeps yelling at me to sit still. And I'm, every contraction I'm dry heaving. And the sweet little nurse Dorothy was just like, stop yelling at her. She is doing her best. And I just was so thankful. But he finally got the epidural in. And I just remember I was like, sitting in the bed. And I just fell over. And he told me to stop being so dramatic. And I was like, I'm not being dramatic. And even at this point, I was a nurse and I didn't really even understand how epidurals completely worked. And I was like, oh yeah, no, this isn't right. And so they're trying to get me sat up in bed and they just couldn't get me up without extra help. And so I was just dead. And by this point, I'm like numb from like my chest down and I could barely lift my arms up. And later on, we came to find out that they had gone spinal. And so I was just like dead numb. But nobody really said much about it. So I thought maybe that's just how it was supposed to be. And we get me in a comfortable position, seated, sitting up. And I don't think I ever like moved, from this position. So I probably got the epidural. So I went in at 7, probably got the epidural at about 10. And then I think I probably just sat in that position for like the next 4 hours till I was having a contraction because I just get this wave of nausea, but otherwise I couldn't feel anything. I was resting. I was relaxing. Everyone was in the room. My mother-in-law was there. Gosh, my father-in-law was there, my dad, my mom, my husband, my sister. And I was like, okay, this is all right. I'm like, I can do this. I'm calm. I'm getting a little rest. I feel good. And they came in to check me. And my nurse, Dorothy, was like, oh, you're 10 centimeters. Can you give me a little practice push? And I'm like, thinking that I'm giving it my all. And she's like, honey, you got to try pushing. And I was like, I think I am. Am I not? I couldn't feel a thing. And she was like, okay, well, let's just give you a little more time. And she came back a little while later. I don't know, maybe an hour or so. And I still was like, she said there was like not even a budge, like not a movement, nothing, and looking back now is like, had a spinal. I had no movement at all. And I remember.
Sorry. Did they mess up the epidural
They
and
did.
put it in the wrong spot or?
Yeah. So they ended up going just a little too far. And that's, why I fell over, because it was like complete spinal block from that level down instead of just that little bit of numbing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's why you go to intense school for it.
Right. Exactly. And I can't remember what he had told me, like the percentage rate of that happening is, but he said it's pretty slim, and I think it is. But man, that stuck with me for a while. I mean, I was a labor and delivery nurse after this, and even watching some epidurals get put in, I'd get that like flush feeling of like flashback of my own experience. So they had just gone too far through those little layers. And so then I remember hearing Dorothy talking to the doctor, and she kind of behind the curtain and telling him what's going on. And I hear a mention of a C-section, and I was like, wow. Like I didn't even get a chance here. And I'm like, okay, it's going to be okay. And she was like, no, you're not cutting her open. This is her first baby. Why can't we just turn the epidural off? And he's like, I guess you could try that if you wanted. And I'm just so grateful that she had done that, because there was no way that I was going to ever push a baby out, like, especially a first baby. And my body was new to what was going on, and then 100% numb. And so they turned the epidural off, and they asked me if they could do that. And I was like, absolutely. If this is going to get me a vaginal delivery, like, yes, please. I'd rather feel everything and at least have a chance at this than to just be wheeled into the OR right now and like not even understood why. And so they turned it off, and it wore off pretty quick. I think within probably 20 minutes, I had enough feeling that when I would have a contraction, I had that urge to bear down. And the doctor, I remember at this point, he was like, okay, you need, and they put oxygen on me and, started, I think, an IV bolus and all of them. I was like, okay, you need to push now. And I only pushed for 15 to 20 minutes with him, and I got him out. And I remember feeling at least most of it. I know I was definitely numbed, but just having that little bit of like, wow, I could feel this. I could feel his head moving into my pelvis. I could feel him coming out. I could feel that like ring of fire. And I was like, I want to do that next time. I want to be able to feel that. And, it's so interesting because like, there are all these things that happen in that birth that I just didn't even think about because I didn't have, I feel like, the education that is so accessible. And again, I live in a small little town of like 35,000 people, and there's barely even childbirth education happening now, let alone 10 years ago. And I just remember being ready to put him on my chest, and they just like brought him to the warmer, and I could sense on his little face that he was just so upset, and he was kind of looking like moving his head around, like, where's my mom? And I just remember going, Mason, buddy, I'm over here. And he just stopped crying, and like his head turned towards where my voice was. And he just was like, calm, and I was like, he's supposed to be right here. But I felt so kind of just like unconfident in, it was like, oh, they know what they're doing. This is just how it goes. Like, that's just how it's supposed to be. And then they brought him over, and he was okay, and he was happy. And I was like, I'm a mom. Here I am. And I ended up having more complications with the epidural after that. They had unhooked the tubing. And because it was spinal and were within those layers that normally wouldn't have cerebrospinal fluid, that fluid started leaking out of the tubing. And so I had really filled up like 4 or 5 chuck pads, the big old blue chuck pads of cerebrospinal fluid. And, they were like, "Oh, honey, you're just sweaty." And I was like, "I'm drenched. Like, am I peeing?" And they're like, "No, you have the catheter in." And I was like, "Well, did something get spilled on here that I just couldn't feel it?" And they're like, "You're just sweaty. That's what happens when you have a baby." And I was like, "Well, can you get this changed? Because I'm soaking wet." And they changed everything underneath me. And then I saturated a couple more pads. And I was like, and my husband is like, has the little cord from the tubing from the back. And he's like, "No, but look at this thing. It's just like leaking." And I was just like, drip, 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 drip.
Oh my God.
And so what happened with that is I had to leave the epidural in for 2 days, and they had it capped then at this point. And then so I had to stay an extra couple days at the hospital, which at this point, from losing all that cerebrospinal fluid, I couldn't tolerate the light. I couldn't tolerate noise. I couldn't tolerate like any extra stimulation. It was like so intense. My head hurt so bad. And so after a couple days, they end up taking that epidural out and seeing if I'm feeling any better, which was like clear I wasn't. And so what they had to do was go in and do what's called a blood patch. And so they go back in spinal, draw, can't remember how much blood they drew, maybe like 10 to 20 cc's. And so just a little bit, but put that blood into that space to help kind of equalize the pressure. Mm-hmm. And I can say it helped a little, but it was painful. Yeah. And I think that like postpartum experience was just hard, but I thought that's just what it was supposed to be like, right? Like everyone around me was like, "Oh, honey, this is just what happens after you have a baby. Oh, honey, you're okay." It's like all the, like older women who were coming to visit and see the baby and see me. And it was like, "Oh, honey, like you're fine. Every mama has a headache after she has a baby." And I was just like, "Okay, I guess this is it." And I would do like my yoga and my stretching and my like, breathing. And I'd have my husband rub my back. And, eventually, probably after like 5 or 6 weeks, I could like stand up out of bed without having back spasms. And luckily, Mason was like a good little eater and he did okay sleeping. We'd have those nights of like driving around, trying to get him to soothe and sleep. But it's almost like as soon as I was able to kind of calm my system, he was able to calm his system. Yeah. And it makes total sense because we're so like connected as moms and babies. But I just knew that like after I left that experience and I kind of went on my own like self journey and learned so much more about birth, I was like, I do not want to do that again. Because in the moment I was like, "Oh, that birth was okay. I mean, everybody says their births suck, right?" Like, yeah, and I can't believe I thought I was one that could like go in and just like gently push out a baby and like not have pain meds. And then I started really looking into it more and I was like, no, I can do that. I can. Like, I don't think it's supposed to be like that. And especially looking back on it like 10 years later, if somebody told me that story, I would be like, no, that is not how it's supposed to go.
As you're talking, I'm like this and this and that. Like, that's oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like, honestly, I think even up until like a couple years after, I thought he was like pretty great. And then I was like, really looked at it, especially, then working as a labor and delivery nurse and seeing some things and hearing some stories. I was like, oh, this isn't how birth is. Like, this isn't how most births are. Even epidurals, like most women don't experience what I
Yeah.
And thank God. And it just was so strange how it's just so like brushed under the rug, move on. You're okay. How's the baby? How's
Yeah.
the baby? How's the baby?
Nobody was normalizing your own experience and like giving you time to like process what happened.
Yeah. And I don't think I really actually processed it until I was ready to have my third baby. So I feel like I even carried some of that into my second, labor and birth and pregnancy. And it was with that third baby that I had known enough that I was like, no, this is one's going to really be different.
Yeah.
And
you also were like, you knew something was wrong with your body, but like no one was listening to you, which that happens so much with women, and we're like, but I guess I just have to deal with it because, I don't know. It's just insane.
yeah. Or like, oh, they're trained in this. They know better. Right. Like, or they work with women all day long. If she sees that a lot of people are wet from sweating all the time, that must be true.
Yeah.
Like, no, like I'm stopping it. And like enough that like I was almost feeling like I was sitting in like a puddle of urine. And yeah, I don't think there's enough listening to women, and whether that's in birth or other areas. It's like, if we know our body, that should be taken into consideration, what we have to say about our bodies and what we're experiencing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What kind of nurse were you before the birth of Mason?
I was a Med Surg nurse.
Okay.
And I think at this point I had probably been into my nursing career maybe 2 years.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, probably about 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like labor and delivery units are so like locked off from all other areas. And so even in my training, like in school, was very minimal.
Yeah.
I think I actually got to see like 1 or 2 births. And I think that's the thing too. We don't, like, as women, really see a whole lot of births. And the births we do see are like the fake ones on TV where they're like dying and screaming and blood everywhere. And
2 minutes later, their baby's born.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I think I'm in labor, and then screaming, and then baby's born. Yes. It's like totally unrealistic. And so that's like what our like subconscious is given to believe.
When I had my second, the labor and delivery nurse, it was the first, which I guess that's just not common, but it was the first baby that she had caught. Because my doctor wasn't there yet. And I'm like, I figured like that would have been something, I don't know, the nurses would have to do sometimes. But
Yeah.
I remember one time I almost had to like catch a baby, and because the midwife was running between 2 rooms, and I was just like, Sue, you can't leave me in here. You can't. And she like told me how to like take cord, like unwrap it around from the neck if I needed to. And I was like looking at her like, don't you dare make me do this. And she like, and she was like the calmest mom, gently pushing this baby out. And I'm like, the head's swimming, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to do this. And the midwife just comes like strutting in, and she's like, you're doing great. And she was gonna let me like do it, but I was like, please take over.
It's funny though, because the nurses really do literally everything. Except that. Like,
yeah, it is. It's like, okay, we'll sit and push with mom for 3 or 4 hours, and then when baby's crowning, like, it's gonna roll in. And
yeah, I think my doctor was there for told me like a minute in Westbourne. I was just like, and they had all the money.
It's just the whole system of it all is a little wild. And yeah, I think with my second baby, like, my plan was like, I'm going to wait as long as I can, go into the hospital.
Yeah.
And like, that was my plan. And I was like, again, in hindsight, I'm like, that was a terrible plan. I mean, it's a good plan, but I should have done more than just that being my plan.
Oh, like that was your whole
That was like my plan. Yeah, that was like my plan. And I can say I did a little more research. I did some hypnobirthing. I read some more books. And I can say too, at this point, I was a little more like in tune with my body after years of like practicing yoga and doing meditations and breathing and all that stuff. But it was like, I was just like, I'm not going in until I absolutely have to, and you're not breaking my water. Like that was my plan. And like, I did reach the goal of having, my unmedicated birth. My doctor, who I had a different doctor for this one, and she was like, she never goes out of town. And like the one time she goes out of town, like out of the year, like a 3-day weekend that she goes and has this amazing weekend with her family, was like my due date. And so I was seeing her, like her partner, and he's amazing too. And I just didn't know him at the time. And so I just remember like calling him one day. I had like 6 weeks of prodromal labor. His pregnancy was like actually pretty easy and okay. But the last 6 weeks, I like had contraction, like off and on, off and on, off and on. And I would be so uncomfortable. And then like as soon as I'd be like, okay, maybe I should call, they'd stop. And he just was like, he's still like a feisty little boy. He's so sweet and cute, but he's still just like that exact personality. Like, I'll just push the button, and then when you're about to like really pop, I'll just like stop. And so at this point, I was like just exhausted. I think I was like 4 centimeters dilated, 4 or 5 centimeters dilated from like 34 weeks on. And they were kind of watching me for a while, but then it was like, okay, you're just having like this prodromal labor. Once I hit 37 weeks, I was like, okay, bring it on. And then it was like nothing. So when I actually like went into labor, I called the on-call doctor, and he's like, well, just come up and we'll check you. And at this point, I was like, I don't know. I'm just tired of this. And I'm sure it's not the real thing. But I'll come up. And I go up, and he said I had like a bulging bag, and I was 5 centimeters. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go home. And he's like, no, you're going to go over to the labor and delivery unit. And I was like, no, remember my plan is to like stay home as long as possible. And he's like, okay, if things intensify, you have to come up, but I'm giving you 2 hours. And that's it. You get 2 hours at home, and then you have to come up. And I was like, okay. And he's like, don't go hiking. Don't go do anything crazy. He's like, this baby's coming. You have to trust it. Just like, because at this point, I was just like, let's just get this baby out. So I was like, I'm walking and the squatting and the rolling on the ball and all that stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'll go home and rest. And, on the way up to the hospital, so I think 2.5 hours went by, and they called me, and they're like, you need to come up. And I was like, okay, I'll come up. And I'm uncomfortable at this point, but not like to the point of, like I was thinking, like rolled over in the bathroom, like throwing up. I was like pretty comfortable. And so my husband, who we were married at this point now, and this baby, he was planned. It was like, I feel like since he was even my planned baby, it was like, okay, pregnancy and this part of it going to go as you want it to be planned. Mm-hmm. And so I would just like, part of me wanted to kill him because he's like, I really need a haircut. And I just think after we have the baby, we're just not going to have time for me to get a haircut. And I just looked at him like, are you kidding me right now? And he had already like hung a new door this day and all this stuff. He's like finishing all the last things. He's like nesting. And I'm like, really? You need to get a haircut like right now. And then I was like, well, I don't feel too bad. So we stop and he goes into the barber, he gets his haircut. And we get up to the hospital and they're like, what took you so long? And I was just like, well, he had to hang the door and he had to get the haircut. And they were like, you stopped to get my haircut? And like, I was like, my husband is not. I mean, he's like a typical husband, right? But he's not like, I need a haircut and I'm not taking you to the hospital. I was like, I am like equally responsible here. And so they like, checked me. I think I was like 7 centimeters. And he's like, well, we could break your water and we could get this going quick. And I was like, no, not doing that. Last time, like, I was like, no. And like, here's a provider who has a really good reputation in our town, but I don't know him, and I just know that he's a kind man, and I just don't really know him either. But he knew how scared I was because, like, as soon as I had my first visit with him when she was gone, I was like, this is what I'm worried about. And he was like, okay, I understand. And so he's like, we won't break your water then. And he's like, so we're probably looking at about like 3 more hours of labor, just if we're looking at average. And I was like, okay. Now at this point, I think I can't go another 3 hours, And he's like, well, here's kind of our options here. And so we were talking about him. And I was like, okay, I have to go to the bathroom. And the guard was like, okay, we'll decide after the bathroom. And I get up and, the point I'm doing like my husband told me it sounded like I was mooing, so I'm just like in there and doing the like, oh, like deep, low breathing. And he's like, very lighthearted manner. That he's just like, honey, you sound like a cow in there. Are you okay? And I'm like, and so, I come out and my provider's like, let's check you again. And I'm like, okay. This is literally just like 5 minutes. And he's like, okay, so you're like 9 centimeters right now. Did you feel your water break when you were in there? And I was like, no. And he's like, okay. Well, and then I was like, I need the epidural. Like at this point, it was like, bam, hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh, so much pain, so intense. And then he's like, okay, we'll call and get you the epidural. I don't know if we'll have time. And then I was just like laying on my side and I was like, oh, he just got into my pelvis. And they were kind of all like the couple nurses and him were like, what? And I was like, oh, I think he's about to come out. During this too, I'm not like a calm, quiet, breathe it out. I'm a very like vocal, roar your baby out. Cause it just, for me, it's like, bam, happens so fast. And like, he was able just to barely get his little gown on and like baby was out. And so from like me walking in, my plan worked, right? Cause I was like, stay at home as long as possible. You didn't break my water. But it was still like, holy crap, that was so intense and so fast. And I think it was 40 minutes from the time I walked into the doors to when I had him. And his postpartum was actually really great. I felt really good. Like it was like summertime. I felt amazing. Everything went really well. He was kind of a little colicky baby, but we did great. And he was like easy and, yeah, so it was funny because it was just like, okay, well, that was my plan and I did the plan, but I think it could still be better than that. And I'll probably do this. I could probably have like 15 babies and be like, okay, how could the next one be more magical? I think birth is just amazing. And so when we did get pregnant with our third baby, which at this point I was a labor and delivery nurse. And I just mentally wasn't doing really well. I think my soul calling was in a completely different place. And I had quit my job as a nurse and, did a yoga teacher training and was a yoga teacher and like finishing massage school. And like I had zero intention of having a baby as all of this transition was happening. So it was like, I just want to be very stable in life and like really on my feet. And then here I am in massage school and not making my nursing wage and having the insurance and all the things that you're like worried about. And I got pregnant. And so I didn't even know I was pregnant. Like I started being like, because I got my IUD out, it was causing a lot of issues. And then I just remember texting a friend and asking if she wouldn't mind telling me just about like, natural ways to, watching your cycle and preventing pregnancy. And then she's like, well, when was your last period? And I was like, oh, I think I'm coming to you a little too late. I don't even remember when my last period was. And I was probably like 6 or 7 weeks pregnant at this point. And just like school was crazy, raising 2 kids. Like, how can I possibly get pregnant so quick getting off of my IUD? And which is silly because that's how we conceived Mason, was like, I missed a pill and got pregnant, but I didn't have any symptoms. And I really chalk this up to like the fact that I wasn't so stressed. Even my like resting heart rate when I was a nurse was 110, and my resting heart rate now is like 65.
Yeah.
And so just way less stress, not so long of hours. I mean, I'm getting 3 massages a week during school. I'm giving massages. It just like everything was so much less stressful. And so I was just like, thinking if this is going to be my last baby, I really want to do it right. And this pregnancy was really amazing. I stayed very active throughout this whole pregnancy. I only had a couple days of feeling like that morning sickness. I just felt very healthy and strong. I felt very like spiritually connected. I had my little morning meditation and routine, and I was very connected to him too as a baby. We didn't want to find out the gender with him because, having the 2 boys, I was like, I don't care if I have a boy or a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I did want a little girl a little bit because I was like, okay, I have my 2 boys. I would love that little experience with a little girl. And then I was like, but if it's a boy and I find out, I don't want any moment of him ever feeling or thinking or having it projected on him that like I was disappointed. So I was like, we just won't find out. And I really think that with him, I was so much more connected to him because I wasn't focused on the gender stuff. I wasn't focused on clothes or a nursery or like thinking about what this little person could be like. And I just was connecting to like what was inside of me. And so I had like my affirmations. I had, my daily yoga practice, my daily meditation practice. Like my cravings were like salmon and like cucumbers. It was like everything it was like great pregnancy. My other ones were like, let's eat cookies and things you would normally think you'd craving. Yeah. But it was like his whole pregnancy was just like easy. And, and I had the same doctor that I had with my last pregnancy. And she like knows I'm like more on the natural side of like life anyways. And she never pushed induction, but, she'd still kind of like bring it up a little, like as we're approaching 39 weeks, I feel like I don't know too many like providers outside of like midwifery that aren't like, well, 39 weeks, could have an induction if you wanted. And I, declined, and she was like totally fine with that. And then 40 weeks hit and I didn't feel a thing. Like I didn't even feel like barely even Braxton Hicks. 40 and a half weeks, 41 weeks. And I was finally like, okay, you can like check me. They didn't want to do a bunch of cervical checks because it's such a mind game. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, here I had one pregnancy where I was like 1 centimeter. And then this other one where I was like 4 to 5 centimeters, and they were still born at the same time. And it just is such a mind screw. And she checked me and she's like, you are 0 and 6. And I was like, what? Like 41 weeks. So we then do, I think, an ultrasound like right before 42 weeks. Cause I was like, will you let me go past 42 if I get to 42 weeks and she just was like, well, hospital policy, all that. And I'm like, no. But she's like, would you be open to an ultrasound? And we can see what your placenta is doing. And I'd really have to like come back and like ground myself and be like, okay, Amy, what are you feeling? Do you think this is not going to go well? Do you think you need them to induce you? Do you think what do you feel? And all of it was like, in my gut, I was like, he's going to come on his own. I know he is, and everything's going to be fine. And we did the ultrasound at like, I don't know, 41 and 5 days, which I know due dates are just like guess dates, but he was happy as could be. I swore I saw a little peep and balls, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're having a boy. And the ultrasound tech was like, no, 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 no. And I was like, pretty sure. And all of my dreams up to this point were like little boy. But they, I think probably at this point said that the placenta was showing signs of some deterioration, and they recommended induction at 42 weeks. And I was like, said that, okay. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, no, like I know I'm not going to have to get induced. I just know it. And she checked me the day before, and I was still like high, thick, closed, baby wasn't engaged. And I was like, what is going on? Oh my gosh. And I had to like really get out of my head at this point to be like, this baby is coming on his own. And I know that my cervix is saying otherwise. And so I'm scheduled for induction that Monday. And maybe it was a Tuesday. So either way. I wake up in that morning, or actually I think that night before, I started to have some regular contractions for like the first time. And I was like, and my middle son must have sensed something. And like, I'm a plant lady. I have like 30 plants. He knocked one of my plants over, and I was just so upset about it. And then everything stopped. And I had a birth photographer for this one, and I texted her, and she was like, okay, well, I'll just see you in the morning. And I was like, I'm sure nothing's going to happen tonight. Well, my alarm goes off at 5 in the morning, and I was just kind of uncomfortable all night, but I can't say like my back hurt or I was contracting, but I think I was just in a deep sleep, and I woke up, and as soon as I put my feet on the floor, like it was like bam, 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 like contraction, contraction, contraction. I sat on the toilet. I wiped. There was like my bloody shower, my mucus plug. And I was like starting to have that like, oh crap, we gotta go. We gotta go. And knowing that I do go pretty quick. And so my mom hurried down, and since I had known a lot of the nurses on the unit, I texted my friend Jenna and was like, hey, I'm coming up. And on my way up, they stopped. And I'm like, okay, whatever. We're on our way. Let's go. And it was so sweet. I get up there. It's like 7 a.m. and they have the room all decorated for me. And it said like happy birthday and flowers. And so it was just like really sweet from all my little like old coworkers. And they get me on the monitor, and I'm having a contraction every like 6 minutes. I'm like a centimeter dilated at this point, and I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, we could give you Pitocin. And then I'm like, no, I'm in labor. Just let my body go. And they were like, and we definitely can't break your water because baby's not engaged. And there was so much fear around his cord coming out first. And I was still like, no, I'm not even going to welcome that into my brain, because I'm not going to manifest it. I'm not going to worry about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I'm prepared for a long day at the hospital, and also prepared to be able to like advocate for myself. Having been a labor and delivery nurse then too, and seeing everything and then doing my research, I was like, okay, I'm prepared, and at least I feel comfortable with all these people. And so my birth photographer had already come in because she had a feeling I was probably in labor, and she's there, and she's like, okay, well, it's probably going to be a little while, and I'll just go drink some coffee down in the lobby and text me if things pick up. And I mean, these contractions were like every 5 minutes. And I remember over the probably next half hour, I was just like leaning on my husband, and he's like the best doula ever. He's like, he'll remind me to breathe, and he'll sway with me. And he learned like from the first one to just like, he'll take a like deep breath, like instead of be like, hey, don't forget to breathe. And so he's just very like calming, and he's just like the best doula I probably could have ever hired. And I just remember leaning on him and going, I can't do this. I just can't do this. Like I'm only a centimeter, and like,
Yeah.
and this is how intense it is. And he goes, Amy, you do this. And I was like, okay. And I'm kind of shaking at this point, and I'm like, but I can't be in transition. I'm like having a contraction every like 6 minutes. So he's like, well, what should we do here? And I was like, maybe we can try the bathtub. And we go and get in the bathtub, and I'm in like on hands and knees in the bathtub, kind of like moving my hips around. And I remember just kind of like talking to him, my baby, and being like, okay, it's safe. Come on down. Like, you can do it. Just work with me here. And I started to almost feel like every contraction, I could almost feel like my bag of waters, like bubbling almost. And I was starting to really have it to like slow down with each contraction. And they were still like every 5-6 minutes. I swear they were so far apart. And I called the nurse, and I was just like, I think I'm getting close. And, they listen with the little Doppler, and I can hear his little heart rate. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's having like little decelerations with my contractions. And they're like, maybe a little, but not too much, just keep us posted. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, I think I am keeping you posted. Like, I thought that's what I was just doing.
Yeah.
And my birth photographer had already come back in at this point. And when I had said I was, going to get in the bath because I was getting uncomfortable, and I stood up and my water broke, and it was like all over, and it was like, whoa, here it is. And from that moment, it took 6 minutes, I believe, and he was born. And so it was, 9:23. So I got there at 7, had him at 9:23. And, it was like, that's where I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I'm keeping you posted right now. And Michelle was her name, was my nurse. And she had a gal training with her. And, it's like, wait, you're just talking about in the beginning. She was like, okay, Amy, like, try not to push. And I just looked at her and I was like, Michelle, you are catching this baby. I am not waiting. I don't know if you see this. I cannot wait. I'm not waiting. I was like, I trust you. You can catch this baby. It doesn't matter. And again, I'm a very like loud vocal birther. But yeah, the doctor, they called her, and she was like, how is she pushing? She was just like barely a centimeter, and she ran over from clinic, and like it literally, she just like ran in, put her hands like in the school gown thing, and like, baby, which is funny, like just to like catch the baby, right?
Yeah.
It makes me laugh a little. But so he just like came fast and furious, and one of my best friends was there. She was the baby nurse, and so I pushed him out, and my doctor like kind of like held him up as she's like putting him on my chest. And I just had not a thought in the world about if he was a boy or a girl. And she was like, Amy, do you see this? And I was like so happy. And I was like, that moment, I was like, I'm so happy I didn't find out what I was having, because I'd never had like, it was not a girl. I was just so happy that I had this little boy. And it was a very peaceful little golden hour. I got to have like him just on me. He latched on well. They helped me get cleaned up quick. I was able to like walk to the bathroom and pee. And I felt kind of like almost pampered, because they knew me. They trusted me. I trusted them, and I know not everybody gets that, but it was just a very nice period of time. And it was even a couple hours before we let like grandmas and grandpas come up, and my boys came up after school, and my oldest was so upset that it was a boy. So he's holding him and like he's all wrapped up in the like blanket, and we hand him to Mason, and Gavin's just a little too little to get it at this point. And Mason's like, "What is it?" And I'm like, "It's a baby." And he's like, "But what is it?" I'm like, "It's a baby, buddy." And he's like, "Is it a girl or is it a boy?" So I was like, "It's a boy." And his face just was like, "Oh, But this baby, he was like, "I know this is a girl," bought her baby dolls and all these cute little girl things for Christmas. He was born, in February, and he just was so sad. And now all three of them, like, best of buds, wrestling all the time. And yeah, his birth was really, I never felt out of control. I felt there was a few moments of like trying to come back down, but it was in that most intense, like body going from 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters, like baby high up to baby probably down so fast. And his birth was really just powerful because I was like, yeah, I feel it in control. I feel very calm. I have a good couple people around me to keep me grounded. Yeah. And even his postpartum period was really great up until lockdown hit. And, I was like, I had a lot of help and I had like pickups of the other kids scheduled, and I just stayed in bed a lot, and I had meal prepped like weeks of food, and I had a meal train set up and people bringing me like good, nourishing, amazing food. And those first 4 weeks were like wonderful. That it would have probably been amazing if it was able to keep going, but COVID rocked.
Yeah.
Rocked
born
a
in
lot
February, and then by April we were
like mid-March, and then
in March, early March. It's like March 3rd.
Yeah. That was like homeschooling 2 kids and having the newborn, and then my husband's working, and I could say I could probably even do a whole different story about it. Was like that birth and that postpartum story were very different. But man, that postpartum, having gone through all of everything I did experience in that postpartum period during lockdown, I think really pivoted me into a very strong sense, a strong mother, like, okay, I can do this. I can do hard things.
Yeah.
And even when we have no idea what we're going to expect, or nobody could have prepared a single person for that. Yeah. And, I feel like it was for the first time in my life that I wanted to be like, oh, well, this person didn't show up, or they should have known to come help me. And it was like, nobody can help me. So I have to figure out how to help me, and kind of had to pull myself out of a little dark hole. And I really found like strength and resiliency in that. And it's really a big part of like why I am who I am, just from that 2 years ago to 3 years ago to today. And yeah.
When did you kind of start doing your childbirth education? Was that after your third, or did you start that before?
So actually I had actually applied for a grant as I was pregnant to try and get like free childbirth education and postpartum support to like my community. So it was kind of in the process, like in my brain, but I hadn't actually like started pursuing like any trainings or anything until after. And I did actually get like hypnobirthing trained during COVID, because we had access to so much stuff online that's normally not accessible if you're not live. And it was a wonderful training. It just didn't completely resonate with me and how I birth. And so I just was like, okay, how did I have what I feel was like a successful, positive birth? And I really leaned into a lot of that, like I listened to my body and I came inward and I leaned on the people I had around me and I communicated and I educated myself and I really brought a lot of spirituality into my daily practice and meditated. And so I would say probably about a year and a half ago is when I started developing my own childbirth course.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So do you kind of like combine all that into one for like new mamas, like the prenatal massage, the kind of childbirth educator?
That's like part of what I'm wanting to build. I've actually done like some one-on-one like education with some of my like prenatal clients with like the childbirth education stuff. But like right now I don't have like a combined like special, but I try so hard to get moms on a regular massage schedule when they're pregnant. Do that. I always recommend like to follow the same schedule as like your OB visits, which is totally not doable for everybody. Or like those last weeks, if you're going to the OB once a week, you should get a massage every week.
Oh gosh.
People do it for like chiropractor though. I mean,
yeah,
you know, also getting your body ready. So
yeah, it is. It's totally needed. And I don't know how other states are, but in like Montana, insurance will cover massage here and there, but mostly like car accidents. So it just depends on some insurance companies. But I know like all around, it's not really recognized as like a medical treatment per se or something necessary. But man, even outside of prenatal, I'm like, I just dream about the day that like insurance companies will cover it so it can be accessible to people.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
That's what I was going to say. Like if my massage therapist covered my doctor's appointment or covered my massages, like my doctor's appointments are covered, she'd know my whole life story by now.
Right? I mean, it's like, can you imagine like this whole like well-rounded like prenatal like care of like you have your doctor's appointments, chiropractor, massage, pelvic floor PT, you're seeing a lactation consultant before you have the baby. Of like, you know, you'd be
a doula.
A doula. Yes.
Yeah. Everything needs to be covered.
It should be.
Yeah. And then after too, like you said, the pelvic floor therapy and lactation. Yeah.
Well, and not even, and like having more follow-up visits than just a 6-week one. And
yeah, that's just a joke.
You know, because even like talking about Mason's births, by the time 6 weeks hit, I was like, hey, I'm gonna actually get out of bed now. And so you go to your appointment and I'm like, feel pretty good, I think. But man, if I would have had any follow-up care prior to that, I would not have reported that I was feeling very good. But whether something would have been done or not, but
yeah, I think of 1 week appointment, a 2 week appointment, and then maybe a 4 and then a 6.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just as much as like babies get. There's just so much emphasis, which our babies are important, but there's so much emphasis on our babies and not enough on our moms. And I think our babies would be well taken care of.
Yeah.
Well taken moms.
I know. I follow this OB on Instagram and like, I really like her and like her stance and everything. And she kind of explained this, like, that's why there's social workers in place. That's why there's like hotlines and things like that. And like postpartum doulas. And like, I love that. But it's like, we have to like set that up for ourselves, or maybe we don't recognize that we need that in time kind of thing. And like, I totally get like, you know, OBs have like other patients coming through and kind of like filtering through. But I wish there was like OBs who did follow up more, or just like had that time in their schedule kind of thing.
Yeah. I think a systemic issue.
Yeah.
I think that people go into the medical field you go and they want to help. And then it's, yeah, they have to see so many people so quickly, so often. And yeah, where's the time?
Yeah.
And then they're also like diagnosing and fixing a problem, but not like asking, like,
Yeah.
are you feeling this? Whatever. They count on us to tell them if we're not feeling or if something's wrong, which, if you're a new mom, you don't know if something's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's why I really wanted to go with like a midwife, a home birth, because the midwives here, the ones that do the home birth, they come and do the baby check and like checking the mom too.
Yeah.
I think it's like, day 5, day, 10 or whatever it is, but it's way more than an OB.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, they'll come to you, which, with me and my background as a nurse, a couple years ago, home birth, I'd say that terrified me. And now I'm like, can we please have another baby? And I just want to have this baby at home.
I love that.
Got rid of so much of like the fear that's so much around birth. And clearly you'll go to wherever you feel safest,
Yeah.
if you have the option. But I've had people be like, why didn't you have a home birth with your last one? And it was not where I would have felt safe at that time in life and in what I knew.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have. We don't have anybody in town who does home births. We do have a couple that will travel from out of town to come here, and it's becoming more common, which is nice, but I would love to give birth at home.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I would want to do my own home, but like, I love a birth center.
Yeah. Yes. I would even love if we had a birth center in our little town.
Yeah.
But we're definitely like small and old school. We're working on it, though.
Cool.
Yeah.
If you ever get a chance to visit Montana, it's a very wonderful, cute little sweet place to come visit.
To meet up.
So on the list, like just pictures I see, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it looks so beautiful. So much greenery.
It is.
That's awesome. So happy we could connect, all these states away.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you. If you want to share just kind of like how people can connect with you, your Instagram.
So my Instagram is _naturally_Amy.
Okay.
And then, my childbirth education page is at Instinctive Birth and Beyond CBE, like childbirth education. Yeah, I'm mostly just on my personal page and share just specific birth stuff on the other one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll link that also in the show notes.
Thank you, ladies, so much.
Hope you have a great night.